So I am the comic relief of this session, and I must tell you that I'm a failed comedian. I've tried jokes many times, and it all backfires. So I'm going to try it again. All right, clicker. Oh, here we go. Let's hope I know how to use this. So I just click on this, yeah? Okay, perfect. So, but I was flying in this morning from Chicago. I live in Chicago now. I remember that 25 years ago, I came to America to study in Arizona, not too far from here, and I landed, and much later they made T-shirts that said 121. That was the day I landed. It was 121 degrees Fahrenheit. And when I was landing, I was wondering, why is it so hot? Do you know why? Because 25 years ago, there was no internet. I couldn't have said, gone to Google and said, what's the weather in Arizona? Okay, that's a joke. See, I'm a failed comedian. Anyway, anybody disagrees with this statement? Any disagreement? Anybody? Perfect. It's crazy out there. So, by the way, before I jump into this, I must admit that you will see things here. This slide deck was put together maybe about 9 months ago. Half of the stuff we put up here, we had no idea was going to happen. So, pandemic, of course we knew that. Climate change, war, we had no idea. Like I said, this was put up 9 months ago. Racism, sexism, terrorism, globalization, isolationism. I don't know if that's a word. Shannon and I debated about that. Nationalism, digitization. By the way, what you will notice here is they're all dichotomies. They contradict each other and they're all happening at the same time. You can read this. Decentralization, disruption and innovation, incredible wealth. I was surprised how people can fly to space these days. We can barely get a ticket on the plane. Abject poverty, rapid economic development, recession, and politics. And all of this is happening all at the same time. Just imagine this. 2 years ago, I was just chatting with this wonderful person from Portland and how COVID turned her life and her business's life over. And it was not too long, in October last year, I was with a client and we were discussing, well, it looks like COVID is slowing down and we get back to normality and things would happen good. And then, Russia walks into Ukraine and now we can't find fertilizers. So we live in this extremely volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous world. Would anybody disagree with that? No. Do you also think, so this is an argument we have a lot within our team and with our clients as well, is do you think today is any less complex than yesterday? We all say the complexity has increased and it's unprecedented. Do you think today the level of complexity is more or less than yesterday, and how has it always been? Anybody? I mean, today is unknown because yesterday we did not know what would happen today. So it's always complex. So complexity is not going to reduce, complexity is not going down, it's only increasing. But we live in this world. And we are in the business of providing certainty. Anybody here who thinks their job is not to provide certainty to their business or their boss or their coworker? You provide certainty to your business by saying, well, I'll find customers and we'll serve the business. So don't you think there's a dichotomy? And it was funny because when I was preparing for this presentation here, I was thinking, I'm going to be in Vegas talking about certainty. I mean, where is the comedy in there? But anyway, so no disagreements, right? So the question is then, how do we make decisions in this VUCA world where it's complex and everything gets thrown at us, everything is new and we have no idea? And what we actually end up doing is we use the same tricks that we used last year and the year before and 6 years before, and 10 years before, and we expect a different result. So I've now worked around the world. As you can tell, I grew up in India. I came to US to study. I worked in the oil business for 10 years. Then I met my beautiful wife in Houston. And amongst many things, what's important about getting married to the person you love is that her parents are dairy farmers. So I went to see the family in Vermont, and that was the first time I stepped into a cow barn. And I realized that cows give milk on Sundays. And my father-in-law was looking at me saying, what are you thinking about? I'm like, I just realized cows give milk on Sundays, and you have to work because you can't shut the tap off. And then I went to Singapore, I worked in Singapore, I worked in New Zealand. What I'm really trying to say is that I worked around the world and many businesses, and most people make decisions by reverting back to their gut, especially in a world that has incessant amounts of data. So status quo won't cut it. So what do we do? And when I say we, I don't mean me and my team and my business, I mean all of us. What we do is we try to find ways to simplify how to make decisions. One thing we learned from the Army is that the Army, they practice a lot, they train a lot, so that when the situation actually happens, they're not thinking, hang on a minute, now what should I do? And by the way, should I do this or should I do that? All that drill is done. So what they have is they have the standard set of things that will kick off once they've identified the situation. So the actual decision is a decision-less execution. So you're not thinking what you are going to do. And in that case, the propensity of error is very low. The problem that we all have is the lack of imagination. And we are unable to imagine failure. So we're not prepared for it. So we try the same thing over and over again. I have a buyer in Germany, and they consume edible oils. Anybody here bought edible oils in the last 2 years? Close. The oil I'm going to talk about is not edible anymore. So any idea what the price of edible oils is today relative to 2 years ago? Wild guess? In multiples, 2 times, 3 times, 6 times? It's 3 times. So palm oil was $400 a ton, it is $13.50 today. This business uses palm oil as their primary ingredient, and they're waiting for the price to come down. They've been waiting for the last 3 years. So what I'm saying is that you end up taking the same technique to apply in a world that, by the way, is changing every day. And if it's unprecedented, well, shouldn't you have unprecedented tricks to try to combat it? It's the worst time to be unsure. Anyway, so we'll jump, and we'll talk about, so what do we do? How do we do this? Screw this you can read it yourself, because this is not where the fun is. The fun starts here. So, news. Anybody knows what news stands for? That's a good one. I'm going to remember that for the next joke. In India, we grew up, and everybody told us north, east, west, south, and many other names. And finally did some digging into this. So news is a 16th century reference for plural for new. So in Britain, when the editor came into the office every morning, he would say, what are all the news? What's new? So what are all the news? One thing we realized in our business is that today, the editor at CNN and all of us find out at the exact same time about what happened. You guys thought about that? Twitter. Anybody on Twitter this morning? Wow. Okay, well, good. So I have something to show you then. Perfect. Thank you so much. So news is getting created instantaneously. There was a bombing that happened in a refinery in Saudi Arabia in, I think, 2-3 years ago. And within minutes of the bombing happened, pictures of that bombing were tweeted, basically making it a non-event. Similarly, I don't know if you recall, there was an Iranian general that was assassinated, and the entire world was up in arms. And within 12 hours, that entire thing got diffused. because Iranians were tweeting how happy they were that their general was dead. So we went from going to a World War III situation 2 years ago to zero World War, world is back to normal in a matter of minutes. That's what the instantaneous news actually does. So question is, how do we use that in our business of food? Narrative. What we have found is everybody talks about sentiment, and between news and sentiment, we found a very big missing link, and that is storytelling and narrative. Sentiment is how we feel if the narrative we rallied with doesn't work or works. That's the sentiment. Narrative is how we as humans have rallied, identified, formed tribes for ages. So we study narratives. How do we study narratives? So this is the mumbo jumbo math that we do, but behind that, I'm going to take you through a little mind experiment here. So just look at this graph, and on the top you see this thing says, lifting travel bans will lift air ticket prices. Right? I mean, travel bans go up, people will try to fly, and the prices of air tickets will go up. And then somewhere here it says lunch is returning to restaurants, and it says reduced food waste and utilize leftovers. And really, the axis that you're seeing is, think about it this way, the higher up the balls are, the more mind share these narratives consume, and the further out on the scale the balls are, the more time humans are spending with this idea. By the way, these ideas we find by looking at words, and we combine the words with the frequency that they occur, where they occur, and form sentences, and then we find how many people are talking and speaking about it. All right? Snapshot 2. So this air ticket thing that was at the top is now at the bottom. Food and, reduced food wastage is lower. Lunch returning to restaurants is higher. And now we have oil prices and precision agriculture. So you have this picture, and you have this picture. Now, do you think they were taken at different times in the last 2 years? Any guess? Yes. And what would that time difference be? It's the same week. One is the weekend, one is the weekday. So which one do you think is the weekday? Is it this the weekday, or is this the weekday? Oopsie, oops. Screw it. What did I do? I screwed up that bad. Okay, so which one do you think is the weekday? Is this the weekday, or is this the weekday? There's one person who knows the answer, so please don't. So the higher the ball is, the more time humans are consuming, or it's consuming more timeshare. Yep. And this is how much time do you spend looking at it. So this is one snapshot, and that's the other. Which one do you think is the weekend? This is the weekend. Somebody said with more balls. So that is true. Number of things. Why is this the weekend? What is the right answer is correct. What's the intuition? Sorry? Correct.
You also have a number of leisure space calls to action. You have the reduction of food waste, you have lifting travel bans, you have animal cruelty, which is people watching YouTube. There's a number of indicators.
Perfect. The other thing is that we talk about air travel in the last 2 years for personal travel. There is no business travel anymore. Very few. Very little. So there's a big commercial, hidden message here as well. What we can also study is, so if this is what's being talked about, how would you spend your marketing budgets? Would you spend your marketing budget marketing, or what narrative would you counter or tackle on the weekend versus the weekday? What's that? Absolutely, 100%. But what I'm saying is that you now can segment it, right? I work in the dairy markets, and was chatting with a gentleman who works in fisheries, and they were talking about plant-based. I would argue 90% of, and I say 90% not because of quantitative, it's just qualitatively, that They don't even know what's the narrative on the other side. How will you counter it if you don't know what the narrative is? So you have to recognize the narrative so you can market to it. He was telling me that in some fisheries conference, anybody who was selling fish, plant-based fish alternatives was not allowed to the conference. Like, that's a fantastic way to compete. You have no idea what the competition is doing, how you're going to compete with them. So we are in the listening business. What you're seeing here now, that is the number of balls and all of that compared in the same scale. That's the weekend, that's the week. There's a lot more marketing being thrown at consumers during the weekday. I don't know why marketing is segmented, because the consumer has more time to consume the information. So you spend money on the right-hand side time, and you're competing with so much more than what you could. Of course, depending on your product, depending on the target audience, depending on many things. But this complex world with all the internet and all the gadgets actually has created a shit ton of opportunity to use your money wisely. And by the way, most of this stuff is not expensive. It sounds expensive, but it's not expensive. So we are in the listening business. That's all I had to say. Any questions? Perfect. Lovely. Thank you so much. Enjoy your stay, and go find some certainty outside.